Ever wondered what makes those romance novels flying off the shelves so addictive?
Interesting question.
Well, today's deep dive is all about unpacking that. We're going to be looking at those common themes and character archetypes, the ones we see again and again in these crazy popular stories.
What I think is so fascinating is that, we often think of books and movies as reflecting reality.
Right.
But romance novels, they're more like stepping into a fantasy, a very carefully curated fantasy.
Yeah, for sure.
And trust me, these fantasies,
Yeah.
they can tell us a lot about, well, our desires as humans.
Definitely. And we're talking about a huge industry here, right? I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Oh, yeah.
And it's driven primarily by women. So what is it about these stories, that really captures the imaginations of so many readers?
I think it's definitely more than just escapism.
Right.
It's like these books tap into these like deep-seated desires I think for certain types of relationships and even power dynamics. And we see this reflected in the heroes, right? The ones that populate all these stories.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. I know one study analyzed thousands of romance novels.
Wow.
And they found some really interesting patterns, especially when it came to the heroes' professions. And we're not talking about your average 9-to-5er here.
Exactly. It's pretty rare to see like a charming barista or, that witty accountant sweeping the heroine off her feet.
Right.
These heroes, they're surgeons, CEOs, these powerful figures. And those professions signify a certain something, right? Like status, security.
It's almost like tapping into that primal desire for stability,
Yeah.
But also that fantasy of being swept off your feet by, someone at the top of their game.
Absolutely. And you know what? That ties into another really prevalent theme, the alpha male archetype.
Yeah.
And when I say alpha male, I'm talking about that decisiveness, that natural leadership, that aura of quiet confidence.
It's totally giving me Mr. Darcy vibes.
Okay.
But it's so fascinating. Even when authors try to subvert that trope with a beta hero, the nice guy, the sensitive soul.
Yeah.
They always seem to end up showing those alpha tendencies when it really counts.
You're telling me. Yeah. It's like that underlying desire for a hero who can take charge.
Right.
It's like hardwired into the formula. These beta heroes, they might start out all gentle and understanding, but there's always this hidden core of strength and protectiveness that comes out.
It's like that saying, still waters run deep.
Yes.
And speaking of hidden depth, another trope that really stood out to me was this whole tough on the outside, soft on the inside phenomenon.
Oh, tell me about it.
You have these seemingly invincible heroes, but they're carrying all this hidden vulnerability.
Yep.
Like a dark past, a secret sorrow, something like that.
Absolutely. It's like that vulnerability. It just adds this whole other layer of complexity. And frankly, it makes them way more appealing.
Yeah.
Because it taps into that fantasy of being the one to break down those walls,
Yeah.
to see the real person beneath.
And that's where the heroine usually comes in, right? She's the key to unlocking those hidden depths. She's the only one who truly sees him.
Precisely. And there's a real sense of, what's the word? Wish fulfillment in that.
Yeah.
Being the one person who understands, right? And can even help heal those hidden wounds.
Yeah.
It's a classic story arc, but it gets even more interesting, trust me, when we start to explore the appeal of, extreme dominance in these narratives.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting, I think. We're kind of venturing into this complex territory here,
Yeah. Oh.
It's fascinating how those lines between fantasy and reality that can get so blurry, especially when it comes to, attraction. Definitely. It really makes you think about those real world cases, of women who were drawn to these notorious criminals.
Right.
Men who'd done these horrific things.
Exactly. And it raises these questions about why someone might be attracted to that, to extreme dominance, even when it's, when it shows up in these really harmful ways.
Yeah.
I mean, there are theories out there about, psychologists call it supernormal stimuli.
Yeah.
Like this idea that we're almost hardwired to respond to these exaggerated versions of certain traits.
Oh, wow. So it's our brains kind of get a little overwhelmed.
Maybe.
And they can't always process those extreme signals in a healthy way. It's a little unsettling when you really think about it.
Oh, for sure. It is unsettling.
Yeah.
But it reminds us that, human attraction is this really complex thing.
Right.
And a lot of times it goes way beyond what we even consciously understand.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole idea of exploring that dominance in these romantic stories, it kind of leads us to this global phenomenon that was 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, right. we can't have this conversation without mentioning 50 Shades, can we? It was like everyone had an opinion on that book.
Yeah, like it was this huge cultural moment. So for those who haven't read it, and no judgment if you haven't, 50 Shades of Grey. It basically centers on this relationship that's built around BDSM.
Okay.
And that stands for bondage, dominance, sadism, and masochism.
Right, right.
And the book's popularity, I think it really opened up this much broader conversation about power dynamics in relationships, especially those that involve submission and control.
It definitely like pushed the boundaries of what we thought of as mainstream romance.
Oh.
And while the whole whips and chains thing, not really my cup of tea, but clearly these themes, they resonated with a huge audience.
They did, I think, especially with women.
For sure.
And I think it all circles back right to those primal desires we were talking about earlier, that like allure of this powerful dominant figure, even when that power is expressed in these, well, unconventional ways, you know?
Yeah. It really makes you think twice about some of those covers you see in the romance section, that's for sure.
Right.
But on that note, like, where do we draw the line? When does a compelling fantasy, like, potentially become something harmful?
See, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's something that authors and readers have been, grappling with for ages.
Yeah.
There's this fine line, right, between, like, exploring the complexities of desire and then maybe perpetuating those harmful stereotypes.
Right.
Particularly when it comes to misogyny.
Because let's face it, a lot of those, like, classic romance heroes, they wouldn't exactly get a gold star from, like, feminists.
Okay.
Not initially, at least. It's
Yeah.
almost like arrogance and possessiveness, even a bit of rudeness. Those are, like, prerequisites for the genre.
Yeah, but here's where that whole transformation thing comes in. Because the hero's journey, it's like it often mirrors that whole fantasy in a way. He starts out, flawed, maybe a little rough around the edges, but it's through that power of love and self-discovery that he confronts those demons. He learns to respect the heroine, and ultimately he becomes a better man.
So it's like a modern day, like, taming of the beast.
Exactly.
Except instead of fangs and claws, we're dealing with, like, emotional baggage and stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that transformation, that's crucial because it allows readers to kind of, like, indulge in the fantasy of the bad boy without, sacrificing that desire for a loving, respectful relationship. So he may start as Mr. Wrong, but by the end, he's embodying all those idealized qualities. Powerful, yet sensitive.
Yeah.
Dominant, yet devoted.
It's like the ultimate fantasy trifecta. But let's be real for a second. This whole idealized portrayal of men in these books, it is just that. It's an ideal.
Yeah.
It's like looking at those, like, airbrushed models in magazines. Not fun to admire, but not exactly, grounded in reality. And just like those, like, unrealistic beauty standards can be a problem.
Right.
I wonder if, these idealized portrayals of men, maybe they create these, like, unrealistic expectations for relationships in real life.
Ooh, that's a really good point. It's easy to get, swept up in the fantasy. But it's important to, like, ground ourselves in reality too, right? I mean, these fictional heroes, they don't have to navigate the complexities of a real relationship. Like, they don't worry about paying bills or managing a household.
Yeah.
Or remembering anniversaries.
It's like that saying, like, we love them for their flaws until their flaws are all we see.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, right? Like, do these books even just subconsciously shape what we expect in our own relationships?
That's a really good question, I think.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth thinking about. We read these stories to be entertained.
Right.
But they also kind of tap into our, like our deepest desires.
Totally.
Our longings. And it's only natural to kind of look for those parallels in our own lives.
Right. Especially when it's such a satisfying escape from, real life.
Exactly.
But where does that leave us then? Should we be reading these books with, like, a more critical eye?
Right.
Or can we just enjoy the fantasy, without overthinking it?
Personally, I'm all about balance.
Yeah.
I think we can still appreciate these books for what they are.
Right.
They're fun. They're entertaining stories that give us this little glimpse into this world of, like, perfect romance. But we can't let those ideals dictate what we expect in the real world.
Yeah. It's like enjoying a big old slice of cake. You savor it, right? The flavor, the sweetness, like the indulgence of it all.
Yes.
But you also know it's not exactly a meal in itself.
Exactly. And it's the same with romance novels with their, alpha heroes and their, like, fantastical scenarios. A great escape. But just like we wouldn't expect to find a perfectly frosted cake growing on a tree.
Right.
Maybe we shouldn't expect real-life relationships to be exactly like the ones we read about in our favorite books.
So it's about, like, enjoying the fantasy, but keeping one foot, firmly planted in reality?
Absolutely.
And maybe even more importantly, remembering that it's real-life relationships, as messy and imperfect as they can be, that offer something way more substantial than any love story you'd find in a book.
Couldn't agree more. It's in those imperfections, those shared experiences, that real intimacy and connection are made, and those are the stories that are really worth cherishing.
So true.
Yeah.
So next time you pick up a romance novel, remember, enjoy the escape, but always keep that grip on reality. Because real life, with all its ups and downs, that's where the most rewarding love stories actually unfold.
Well said.
And on that note, I think we're ready to close the book on this deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone.